We often see the property managers aren't following up, aren't getting copies of these insurance policies. And when casualties occur, there's basically no coverage from the renter, in particular from a liability perspective.
This episode brought to you by Suites at Madison. Meeting and conference rooms for rent by the hour, week, month, or year. Suites at Madison, where business gets done. Check them out at www.downtowntampaoffice.com. Now, on to the show.
You are listening to the Invest Florida Real Estate Show, covering topics in lending, buy and sell strategies, property management, hot markets, and tips and tools to guide you along the way on your path to real estate success. You want Florida investment real estate talk? You have come to the right place. And now, our hosts, Eric Odom and Steven Silverman.
Today, we are so happy to have Jimmy Clark return to the show. He is the Senior Vice President and Real Estate Practice Group Leader for Hardin, one of the Southeast's leading insurance, risk management, and employee benefits firms. Jimmy, so happy to have you back in the studio.
Thank you so much for having me again.
You know, it's these episodes of Lawfare, quick hitting, and you're really proficient at doing these. So, this is why I keep calling you back. You're very efficient. You can get those tidbits done in quick sound bites. But this one might be a little bit longer because we're going to be covering 3 hot topics in leases and how that might affect you on the insurance side, right?
Yep.
Why don't we start with renters policies? How does that typically integrate, and what are some of the issues that landlords run into on renters policies and the lease?
So I see a lot of leases, kind of single and multifamily leases, require that the tenant have some type of insurance policy, right? I think this is a great practice, but in execution, it sometimes fails. We often see the property managers aren't following up, aren't getting copies of these insurance policies. And when casualties occur, there's basically no coverage from the renter, in particular from a liability perspective. We've also seen, which is pretty interesting. We've seen it actually too in the commercial space, but you have somebody enter a multifamily unit and something happened, a liability issue happened. You have a guest come in and that person doesn't have any liability insurance. The renter, the primary renter doesn't have any insurance for that liability. And what they do, even if there is no liability on behalf of the owner of the property or the manager, they'll actually come after the manager and say,
and the property owner,
and say, listen, we were under the impression there was liability insurance here. And then B is, you contractually required that they have it and they never had it. You never followed up on it. And basically this is an error or omission on behalf of you, the owner and the manager, which that allegation.
So you're putting the noose around your own neck. You're telling people to have a renter's policy and then you don't enforce it.
That's right.
So the person that was injured on that site now is going to come after you because you didn't do your job.
That's exactly right.
Wow. Okay. That's painful. And I guess fairly typical with apartment dwellers. They might not have any sort of major work that is being done on their unit, but they might have somebody come in to do, maybe install some shelving or whatnot. And frequently these guys are handymen that don't necessarily have insurance and workers' comp and these other issues. So if you're not doing your job as the owner / manager, and really it's just a matter of having a system in place to be able to track to make sure if you're requiring a lease that you're actually getting the renter's insurance.
That's right.
Covering. Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
If you put it in a lease, you better follow up on it.
Okay. So that's a painful point with the renter's policy. Now, what about rent abatement? Why don't we start first with this is topic number 2. We're changing topics here. This is the second of 3 that we're going to be discussing. Rent abatement. This is more for commercial dwellings, correct?
Yeah.
Okay. So rent abatement, let's talk about what that means.
And it could apply to some residential, but basically it means if there's a casualty, a fire or, a partial casualty, when is your tenant allowed to stop paying rent?
So we have some sort of a casualty and the place there's smoke damage in the place and you really can't use it. So that's what you're referring to here, right?
Yeah.
There's that period of, how do we correct this situation.
That's exactly right. So the issue comes down to, though, is on the residential side, when are they allowed to stop paying rent? And usually it's a shorter time frame. But on the commercial side, a lot of lawyers think they've quote unquote won when they get a 90, 60, 90, 120 day rent abatement. But the real problem here is that the insurance policies, insurance carriers during a time of loss read those leases and figure out when they're contractually liable to start picking up the loss of rents. So in that situation, let's say it's a 90-day rent abatement period. Well, if the tenant doesn't have appropriate insurance or they just stop paying rent because they're no longer open, your insurance carrier is not going to start paying you the loss of income coverage until that rent abatement period's over. Therefore, you're not going to get rents during that period of time.
So there's a fire and you guys are properly insured from a liability standpoint in terms of who's fixing, how's fixing, what that deal is. But now you've got a loss of revenue. That's really one of the main issues here.
Right. And you may be paying for a full year's of loss of revenue on your policy. But when the loss occurs and the carrier looks at your lease, they're going to say, yeah, we'll give you a year of lost revenue after the rent abatement period's up, which is very damaging to your center or office.
No question about that. Let's add one more layer to this. You required your tenant to have some sort of business income insurance for this exact reason. You didn't follow up with them. Now you lost a tenant on top of that.
That's right.
So you're rebuilding your place and you're 3 to 4 months after that, 5 months, whatever that lead time is to try to find another tenant. So the loss here can be pretty substantive.
Well, and I add one last little fun fact is your business income coverage stops the date you get CO. So if it's a 90-day fix.
So CO meaning the certificate of occupancy. You've completed the build out and it's ready to go, but now business income has ceased.
That's right. Now you just have an empty shell.
Awesome.
And there's coverage you can talk to your agent about that gets you coverage beyond that, but that's how generally business income works.
Yeah. So you've essentially got this rent abatement period. They're going to be taking a hit on the income. And then you've got this period of lease up. If you're losing the tenant, that's not always the case. Frequently the person has proper insurance and you've done your job to make sure that they've got that proper insurance in place. But if not, and we see this frequently, now you've got this, not only the rent abatement period issue, but you've also got that lease up period that could be 5, 6 months, whatever, particularly on the retail side that we will see this type of delay in getting a new tenant in place.
Yep.
Three of three, tenant improvements, which again happen to be more likely on the retail and office side. How are some of the issues that you see landlords taking losses on the tenant improvement and maybe some ways that they can do a better job of protecting themselves?
I see this frequently. Once again, not to discredit the lawyers that are on the other episodes, but a lot of times
some of them are your friends, by the way.
Some of them are my friends. They're good lawyers, but they feel like they've won something when they get the tenant to insure the tenant improvements, right? So the problem with that, once again, is in the event of a fire, the tenant improvements, which you have paid good money to install, you're putting the entire process on the backs of your tenants to basically recreate those because your insurance will not cover it if the lease says it's the tenant's responsibility to reconstruct.
So let's talk a little bit about that, let's give an example of how that might work. I'll give an example of one of our retail centers. We did $250,000 in tenant improvement for a medical build out. We require the tenant to cover the insurance on those improvements. Okay, so it's covered. Big deal. You've got the tenant that's covered. What are some of the pitfalls? Maybe you don't check their insurance.
Well, so you're going to get a certificate of insurance showing they have $250,000 of property insurance.
Okay.
There could be a co-insurance provision that says, if you don't have at least 80% or 90% of all the values, you're going to be heavily penalized. So in a medical office situation, what if they have $1 million of equipment and they only have $250,000 of personal property?
Okay.
You're not going to get that $250,000 back. On top of that, they could have exclusions for winds. They could have exclusions for fire. They could have exclusions for theft. They could have exclusions for everything under the sun, and you'll never see $1 of that tenant improvement back.
So help me understand, how can a landlord do a better job of carving out? Do they just take that insurance on themselves and make sure that it's insured properly and then pass that on to the tenant if they can? Or is there some way, if the tenant is covering the tenant improvement costs, what can they do to make sure that their carve out for the tenant improvements are being taken care of?
My general rule of thumb, and every single person has their own risk tolerance, right? But my general rule of thumb is if you're installing the TI and it's your money, I would want to insure the TI myself. And on top of that, it also saves from a deductible standpoint, because instead of having two deductibles, the tenants and your deductible, you have one single deductible for any casualty. And then, and kind of overall, you're probably buying more insurance, so you'll probably get a better rate than your tenant does on that insurance.
Terrific. Jimmy, you specifically run a team at Hardin that focuses on real estate.
Yep.
Not equipment leasing or any of that kind of stuff, correct?
Right.
Okay. But you guys at Hardin do a wide array of different types of insurance.
All kinds of industries. But
okay.
Yeah, me specifically real estate.
And I've said this on previous shows with Jimmy, and I believe it. Guys, I don't really care who you end up using for insurance. I'd like for you to use my friend Jimmy. Don't really, if you've got some other person that helps you, make sure that they are folks that understand the unique needs of real estate and what can happen. If you're covering a lot of different general liabilities, and property and casualty, whatever types of insurance that are out there, it's hard for you really to get a full perspective from an agent that has their fingers in a lot of pies. You want to be able to have somebody who focuses and understands the risk points specific to real estate, and not just homeowners, somebody who has commercial experience. And commercial, I would include multifamily, retail, industrial, office, medical, et cetera, et cetera. So there's my endorsement for the day for Jimmy's group. They've been a resource for us when we have questions about how to do a better job of covering us and our clients who we do property management for. So Jimmy, if folks want to get in contact with you and discuss how you might be able to help them, how would they go about doing that?
They can call my office line. It's my direct line's 813-367-5609.
Jimmy, as always, we appreciate the time that you invest with us on the show and come in and talk about how landlords can do a better job of protecting themselves. These little quick hitting, you're not a lawyer, you're an insurance guy.
Yep.
And this is part of the Lawfare podcast, because what typically ends up happening is that the insurance guys get very entangled with the lawyers, because when there is some sort of casualty, the landlords and the tenants and everybody goes scrambling for their lease and then their attorney to make sure that things get worked out properly. So you add a unique perspective onto these Lawfare episodes. Really appreciate it.
Appreciate you having me.
All right, Jimmy. Until next time, buddy, we'll definitely have you back.
Great. Thanks.
You've just listened to the Invest Florida podcast with Eric Odom and Steven Silverman. Join us every week for actionable real estate investment ideas, and of course, visit our website at www.investfloridashow.com for more shows and tips on how to earn a cash flow in the real estate market in Florida. While hosts and producers of the Invest Florida show have no reason to doubt the validity of comments of our guests, we do not warranty their accuracy. Please check with your legal, financial, and tax advisors before entering into any investment. Returns will vary from person to person and deal to deal based on unique circumstances. All information expressed in this show is for educational purposes only. Opinions of the guests are not necessarily shared by the hosts and producers of the Invest Florida show.